Hello everyone! Today I'm going to walk you through some of the techniques for making my cranberry walnut sourdough bread. I'm starting with my levain that has doubled in size. The levain consists of 45 grams of mature active starter, 45 grams of all-purpose flour, 45 grams of whole wheat flour, and 90 grams of water. I also made an autolyzed dough which consists of 800 grams of bread flour, 100 grams of whole wheat flour, and 580 grams of room temperature water. The dough has been autolyzing for 1 hour, which helps to hydrate the dough and develop the gluten protein. I kept 100 grams of water aside to help incorporate the dough. I'm now going to mix my levain into the dough. First, I scrape out the levain onto the dough with a wet spatula. Then I pour about half of my reserved water on top, and I'll use my hands to squeeze and fold in the levain and get it all incorporated. Once I'm done mixing it, I'll cover it and I will let it rest for 15 minutes. My dough has now rested for 15 minutes after incorporating the levain into the dough. Now it's time to add the salt. I have 17 grams of salt, which I'm going to sprinkle over the surface of the dough. Then I'm going to add the rest of my reserved water over top of the salt. And using my hand, I'm going to mix the dough all around until the water gets incorporated. It's going to be quite wet, don't worry about that. Now that the water is incorporated, I'll turn out the dough onto the counter and start the slap fold technique. This technique is pretty much what it sounds like. I pick up the dough, then slap it onto the counter and fold it onto itself. Then I turn it a quarter turn and repeat. The dough will be quite wet and stringy at first, but after about 4 minutes, it will become more cohesive and it'll start to catch some air and look puffy. You can see that the dough is much more cohesive and looks puffy. Now I'm going to grab a wet bench scraper and use that to scrape the dough up and put it back into my bowl. Then I'm going to cover it and let it rest for 15 minutes. My dough has now rested for 15 minutes, so it's time to start the stretch and fold process. To do this, I'm going to wet my hand with some water so that the dough doesn't stick to my hand. Then I lift up one corner of the dough, stretch as much as I can without breaking it, and bring it over to the other side of the bowl. I do this with the other 3 corners. This is my first stretch and fold. I need to do 2 more stretch and folds before adding the filling. I'll wait 15 minutes between the first and the second, and 15 minutes between the second and the third. Then after the third stretch and fold, I'll wait for 30 minutes before the next step. I've now done 3 stretch and folds, so it's time to add the filling ingredients to my dough. For my filling, I have 100 grams of dried cranberries, 100 grams of walnuts that have been toasted and roughly chopped, and the zest of 1 orange. I'm going to sprinkle the filling ingredients over the top of the dough. I'm going to use a wet hand to squeeze the ingredients into the dough and help them get stuck in. Now it's time for my 4th stretch and fold. So I'm going to stretch the dough from each corner again, as I have the other previous 3 times, and then let it rest for 30 minutes. After that, I have 2 more stretch and folds to do. 30 minutes between the 4th and the 5th, 30 minutes between the 5th and the 6th. Then after the 6th stretch and fold, I let it rest covered for 90 minutes. The dough has now had 90 minutes of rest after the 6th stretch and fold, so I'm now shaping it into loaves. I cut it apart with a wet bench scraper into 2 sections of dough. Then with the scraper in my hands, I twist and pull the dough so that it becomes round and the surface of the dough becomes taut. I'll do that with the other section of dough, and then I'll let it rest for 10 to 15 minutes before the next step. Now that my dough has rested for 15 minutes, it's time to shape it into the final loaf and put it into the Banneton basket. First, I put some flour over the entire surface of the dough. Then I take a bench scraper, which I put some flour on as well, and scrape under the dough to help loosen it from the counter. Then I'm going to turn the dough over. Now I take the bottom of the dough and fold it up to the middle. Then one side to the middle, and then the other side. Finally, I take the top and fold it all the way down to the bottom and over to form a log shape. This dough is now ready to go in the basket. I prepared my Banneton basket by putting some flour all around it, and then I put some poppy seeds and sesame seeds in as well. These help to keep it from sticking to the basket and also give it a bit of crunch after, but they're optional. If you don't have a Banneton basket, you can use a colander or another basket that's lined with a linen towel. Now I'm going to lift up my dough and put it topside down. Then with my fingers, I squeeze all the seams together so that there are no more seams in the dough. And it helps keep the air trapped in the dough so it can rise later. After that, I'm going to cover it with plastic wrap and let it rest in the fridge overnight. I did forget to take a video here, but before putting my bread in the oven, I scored it. What I did is I took a serrated knife and I made about a 1/2 inch deep cross over the top of the dough. This helps it expand nicely. The bread will take 50 minutes to cook. 30 minutes in a Dutch oven with the lid on, and then 20 minutes without the lid until it's golden brown. After it's done cooking, you need to wait about 2 hours before cutting the bread, otherwise it'll be gummy. I hope you enjoy your bread, and thanks for watching.